Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I'm presenting this way because I have to travel suddenly for something urgent back to my home country in China. So the pose that I've picked is Ustrasana camel pose because this is one of my favorite back bends. I have a relatively tight upper back, so this is one of the back bends that I am able to do and feel comfortable with. So this pose was first mentioned in, actually not first, but it was only really described in the Guranda Samhita text among the major known medieval Hatha Yoga texts. So it was, which was compiled in approximately 1700. So I'll go into the translation in a little bit, but I do want to point out that there was a mention of Ustra Nishadana in the Bhashya of the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So the sutra was 2.46, and the sutra reads, motionless and agreeable form of staying is asana, yogic posture, according to Aranya's translation. As we know, this is one of the few, actually three sutras out of the 195 verses in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra that talks about asana, and it's very short, but we can fortunately find some more information in the Bhashya. So there were the mention of many of the poses that we're familiar with and have been presented so far in the course, including Padmasana, Virasana, Vajrasana, and so on. And as we go down the list, we can see Ustrasana, Camel Nishadana. But what was interesting was there was no further description to any of these poses. But if Ustrasana was listed as one of these, was in this popular list of postures that we know today, it sounds to me like Ustrasana was one of the also popular poses back then when this Bhashya was written, at least. So if we look into what the camel pose look like, the modern interpretation of it, or as I know it, it looks like this. Again, let's give this beautiful lady another chance after Emily's presentation. And this is how I've come to know the pose. But if we look into the different translation of the original Giranda Samhita description, though, in the Sanskrit text, the Mallinson translation says, lie prone with both legs crossed, placed on the back and held in the hands, and firmly draw in the abdomen and the mouth at the same time. The sages call this Ustrasana. And he included a very helpful pictorial illustration of this lady demonstrating this pose. So as we can see, this looks very different from what we know as the Ustrasana that today. And I do want to point out, I highlighted both legs here because in the Vasu's translation, though, there was a significant difference. So Vasu's translation did not have the legs crossed, and so his translation, as we can see here, is lie on the ground face downwards, turn up the legs and place them towards the back, catch the legs with the hands, contract forcefully the mouth and abdomen. This is called the camel pose. There was unfortunately not a picture description, the illustration in the book, in the translation. So I took the liberty myself to try and demonstrate this pose in this picture you can see here, according to the description. So I went back to the original text in Sanskrit to see if I can find anything that actually indicated crossing the leg. And with the help of Zoe's, obviously. So this little phrase in the verse, the pada yugma vyastam. In fact, pada, as we know, is the feet, and yugma is a pair of, and vyastam, in fact, means separated. So I'm not sure where Mallinson got the crossing the leg from, but I'm sure there must be a reason. But in any event, this has always been a prone position if we look at the medieval Hatha Yoga text. So how then how did it then become a kneeling pose from what the original Hatha Yoga text then? So I looked into this shift and I found that this shift actually happened somewhere between 1920 and 1960. And before the 1920, camel pose was described as a posture done on the belly. But after 1960s, it was mainly described as a pose done on the knees, kneeling position. And in between these 40 years, we can find description and instruction on either way of doing this pose. For example, in the 1931 Shivananda book, the written illustration was clearly the traditional prone position, echoing the Granda Samhita. As we can see in the description down here, it says the first line says lie on the ground face downwards. But what was interesting was the picture, though, in the back of the book illustrated a kneeling back bend, as we can see here. Not sure why there was a discrepancy, but there was a clear description of the. I don't know whether this picture came afterwards or, but the description was clearly in line with the Granda Samhita description. And then if we look at the 1934 book by Sita Devi, it was interesting though. It was one of the early texts in the 1900s to include the kneeling Ustrasana. So the description was also very clear that support the body on the toes and the knees and gradually bend backwards. And then, but after this 1933 book though, in 1938, the Buddha Bose book went back to the prone description of lying on the abdomen here. There wasn't any photo to illustrate this, but as we see, the description was very clear. Then if we go into the Yoga Mimamsa journal in 1956, again, a very clear description in line with the Granda Samhita. And here it's actually very consistent with Mallinson's translation of crossing the leg. As we can see here, the student lies on his seat with his mouth downwards, holds his hands at the cross-legged turn backwards, and contract his abdomen and mouth rigorously. So as we can see also that this demonstrated in the illustration, this is what Mallinson has translated and described the pose as. In the 1960 book by Vishnu Devananda, though, there wasn't any posture called camel per se in his publication, but we can see a recognizable kneeling back bend though, called Chakrasana, and it was translated as wheel pose, and a few variations were provided to the pose. In variation 5, though, it says assume a kneeling position and bend backwards, raising the buttocks. Now grasp the ankles. This pose is considerably earlier than the two previous variations, which were the full wheel pose as we know it today. There was a helpful picture illustration here too, as this is the camel pose that I've come to know today in the modern postural yoga. And obviously then in 1966, the Iyengar book on light on yoga defined camel pose as a kneeling posture. And I believe because his book was so profoundly influential, everybody then came to know this pose as what we know today. And his description of the pose was kneel on the floor, press the feet with the palm, throw the head back, contract the buttocks, keeping the neck stretched back, with such illustration as we can see on this slide. And that's after 1966. And since then, we have seen the camel pose has been consistently known as what we know today in this described here and illustrated in this picture. But I do also want to point out that the Hatha Yoga medieval text description, the Granda Samhita, text description of Ustrasana, though, seemed very similar to me to the Dhanurasana. And obviously, I'm not the first one to notice the similarity, because both Shivananda and Buddha post book in the 1930s pointed out the same similarity too. They compared this version of Giranda Samhita Ustrasana to Dhanurasana. And they said that the only difference is that this medieval Ustrasana does not involve lifting of the thighs. So now we've looked at the evolving trend of this pose over time, and so then I've looked at the symbolism of the animal camel in India to see whether I can see any more clues as to what is included in this posture. So as of today, approximately 80% of all India's camel are in the state of Rajasthan, because that is a state of most of the desert area. And in terms of the deity realm, camel is a vehicle for a regional Hindu goddess called Momai, also known as the Shama, and popular in Gujarat, especially in desert region of Kutch. Now we can see that it's a neighboring state of Rajasthan, again for obvious reasons, because these areas are desert regions, and camel is a very important transportation in this area. And I've also seen in my research that camel is also one of the vehicles for Hanuman, and Hanuman obviously is a more well-known deity that we've come to know today. Camels are usually praised for their dedication and patience, a very important animal to especially human, especially in the desert region. In terms of the health benefits of Ustrasana, I haven't been able to find any recent medical publication dedicated to this pose. But in general, in general, back bends are known to have these following health benefits. Balancing and strengthening the spine helps with posture. And back bends are also known to increase flexibility in the shoulder, help stretch upper front body, a good heart opener. It was also mentioned that women who suffer from menstrual cramps and related problems too can benefit from this asana. Helps with respiration and digestion. Obviously, the kneeling version of Ustrasana also it helps opening the hip flexor, so that's a good stretch to the hip flexors too. And back bends are also generally believed to decrease stress and anxiety, boost energy, and increase oxygen level. We can also find precautions, though, to back bends in general, such as untreated hypertension, lower back pain, osteoporosis, spinal stenosis, back or neck injury, obviously, because we are now bending the neck as well as the back, and pregnancies. And I do find in the handbook for Yogasana teachers book by Robin that he mentioned specifically that if when you hold a head in extension, especially he named as when thrown backwards in Ustrasana, the throttling of blood flow through the vertebral arteries within the cervical vertebrae here can lead to nausea and dizziness. So these are the things that we need to watch out for. Having said the precautions, this will conclude my presentation. Again, I'm sorry for not being able to present this live, but if you do have any question about this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would hope to join you guys live again in a week or two. Thank you so much for your time.